Autism and cure. 96 hits. Wow, somebody must have cured autism. I read every article. Everyone says this: there is no cure for autism. And usually followed by a but, or a however, or maybe we should go down this pathway of research. The reason the cure got in there was because it really should be no cure. Okay, because that's what medicine thinks about autism. It has no cure. So why am I giving a lecture about how close are we to a cure? Because that's what you want. That's what I want. Are we there? Are we getting there? So, a lot of intersections. I don't know how many circles I drew there, but there's a lot of circles, and there's a lot of circles in the literature of things that are overlapping. But somehow, either we wind up with optimal brain function in the center of that, or we wind up with some developmental disorder, whether you call it autism or ADHD or LD or whatever you want to call it. We either wind up with that circle giving us optimal brain function or we don't. So we have a big issue. So I threw out a lot of chicken and eggs at you, okay, and I know some of you have skipped breakfast and are just having coffee at this point in time, but what is it the insult to the gene or the vulnerability of the gene? So these vulnerability genes that we know we have in autism have been around for how long? Probably a really long time, like thousands of years. Genetic drift in the human species is relatively subtle. It doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen generationally without some sort of huge environmental impact like radiation or pesticides or other sorts of things. So these are not bad genes. You're not giving your kids bad genes. They may actually be not even your genes after they go through environmental pollution. They may alter and change. So, recovery from the diagnosis of autism and then. So this is an excellent study from Karolinska, and there's some great researchers at Karolinska, and I've been following the work of Gilbert, and I'm going to go through some of his work with you today because I think it's a really exciting addition to our thinking about autism. Excuse me. So they followed a bunch of kids who recovered. They used the word recovery instead of cure, but by everybody's criteria, they had no symptoms of autism. They were mainstreamed. They went through intensive ABA and biological treatment. They had no symptoms of autism. They followed them sequentially for years, and guess what happened to them? They stopped therapy. They probably went off the diet. Everybody thought they were out of the woods. Nearly all of them regressed back into autism. So, at least in this situation, the way they were approaching them at Karolinska, they were causing a remission of autism, but not curing it. So, Gilbert came up with this term, essence. How many of you have read Essence and know are familiar with Essence? Wow, you're a bunch of virgins. That's great. So I can introduce you to this concept. This is awesome. So, genius guy, open-minded, thinking about what's going on, look around and says, you know, I've been a psychiatrist for a long time, and I didn't see the kind of problems with children generationally that I'm seeing now. Something's going on. And so he coined this term, essence, in child psychiatry. Early symptomatic syndromes eliciting neurodevelopmental clinical exam. So what is it that takes you as a parent, takes your kid to a developmental specialist to say, what's wrong with my child? The whole blanket of things, everything that's out there. So this is what he threw, and this is his Venn diagram of his intersecting sites. Attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum, conduct disorder, developmental coordination disorder, intellectual developmental disorders, language delay, nonverbal learning disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, specific language impairments, Tourette's syndrome, tic disorder, reactive attachment disorder, and language disorders. How many of you have a kid that falls on some one of those essence numbers there, okay? Do you think there's some overlap? Do you have like an OCD, bad-acting kid who's language delayed too? There's a lot of overlap between those, and he shows that in terms of how a lot of these are intersecting. Genetics and neurobiology of essence, so they talk about some vulnerability genes and some things that may be associated with it, and they come away with some pretty small numbers of genetic associations, but that's where the game is right now. Everybody wants to talk about genetics. So, how about that? That's just part of the biochemistry's chart of human beings. When we start to mess with that, what do you think we're going to get? Do you think we're smarter than Mother Nature, whoever she is? I want to meet her someday. But do you think we're smarter than her? Can we mess with that in a way that results in good things happening predictably? It's really tough to do that. We do it every day. What you eat messes with your biochemistry. What the bacteria and the yeast and the viruses that live within you do with what you eat and who you are alters your biochemistry. What you breathe, what you drink alters your biochemistry. The EMF that you're exposed to alters your biochemistry. It's a lot of pushbacks, a lot of checks and balances to try and keep you stabilized, but we're messing with it in a big way. There's growing acceptance for this whole concept, though. This is a textbook from Springer, which is a very reputable press, talking about microbial endocrinology, the microbiota, gut, brain axis in health and disease. So it's coming into maturity, and a lot of people are starting to wake up to this in science, and there's books written about this, and official textbooks about this. But how many of you go to your pediatrician or your neurologist and they immediately get this whole concept? It hasn't translated yet to the regular practice of medicine. But ask for my slides, and I'll get them to you. You can probably figure out a way to get a public Dropbox type of a thing where you can just download them if they don't have them through Autism One. Okay, so I'm going to be brave. If you need my slides, here's my personal email address. drbradstreet@gmail.com. It doesn't go through a secretary, it comes to me. I'll figure out a way to get you all my slides. You can then print up a slide or two, and don't go print up all the slides and give them to your doctor. Just one or two at a time. Say, hey, what do you think about this? And they say, wow, I didn't know there was a textbook about that. Yeah, maybe you should, wake up to this concept. Lots of complicated interactions between the gut and the brain. It's bidirectional. It's not just the gut influencing the brain. The brain influences the gut. How many of you, when you get anxious and nervous, feel it here? How many of you have anxious and nervous kids? Yeah. Where do you think they feel it? There as well. So this slide for me is wonderful because it actually talks about defensins. These are very important, very small molecules that get into mucus and are there to defend you naturally. They're antimicrobial peptides. I think you could define autism as a deficiency of these antimicrobial peptides because they can't defend themselves. So they wind up getting lots of potential insulting bacteria that colonize them and overgrow because they can't protect their mucus barrier in the intestinal tract. So this is another one, neuroimmunological basis of behavior and mental disease and disorders. What? There's a whole book about that? You're not the only person in the world that thought about this? Wow. Where are the people that write these chapters, by the way? Why aren't they out there taking care of our kids? So, evidence of a common endocannabinoid-related pathomechanism in autism spectrum disorders. Wow, that is a mouthful. Okay? Endocannabinoid means smoking marijuana. No, it doesn't. Endocannabinoid was actually discovered, that whole regulatory pathway of receptors and the natural fatty acids that attach to it was discovered through marijuana research. That's why it got called cannabinoid. But it really has nothing to do with that. Lots of plant ligands and lots of fatty acids can attach to those receptors on cells, but this is one of the big regulators. And because of all the concern about marijuana, it has been a very neglected place in medicine for a long time, but now it's starting to come in its own. So it's developing a lot more credibility because we've learned that it's tied into almost all human disease. It's tied into cardiovascular disease, obesity, hypertension, mood disorders, and based on Max Planck and our research, we think it's tied into autism as well. This is only part of the picture. This is from the Max Planck Institute publication, where they think that the CB1, the cannabinoid 1 receptor in the brain, is being abnormally regulated in autism. That is kind of like the gas pedal and brake operation for the big pyramidal cells, which are the neurocircuit cells that are firing and creating the harmonics and the rhythms that we use for our thoughts and our memories. But it's more than that, because now we know that CB2 receptors, which is usually thought of as anti-inflammatory, regulate a whole lot of the brain, and I'll get into that some more tomorrow. So, keep calm and avoid bad microbes. Maybe it's not so much avoiding the bad ones. is not having the good ones. You really need to have the good ones to help defend you from the bad ones. So this is me back in my military career when I was a test pilot. So you thought autism was scary. We are entering the danger zone. And we're entering the danger zone because when you start to comment on big agri and big pharma and big government, Stephanie, you attract a lot of favorable attention, don't you? No, you really don't. But let's jump in.